Here's something that will make you uncomfortable. The person you're most attracted to right now is probably the worst choice for your mental health, and you already know it. There's a psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik Effect that explains why we obsess over people who leave us hanging, who never fully commit, who keep us in perpetual uncertainty. Your brain is wired to fixate on incomplete experiences. That half text, that canceled date, that I'm not sure what I want right now. It's psychological quicksand. And the insecurities driving their behavior, they're about to become your problem. Let me show you the clinical signs you've been trained to ignore. Red flag number 1, the intermittent reinforcement pattern. This person texts you intensely for 3 days, then vanishes for 5. They're affectionate one moment, distant the next. Clinical psychology has a term for this. It's called a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, and it's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Your dopamine system is being hijacked. But here's what they're really telling you. They cannot regulate their own emotional state, so they're using you as an external stabilizer. When they feel empty, they flood you with attention. When they feel overwhelmed by intimacy, they withdraw. This isn't mysterious. It's a textbook avoidant attachment pattern rooted in childhood emotional neglect. The neurochemistry here is devastating. Every time they come back after silence, your brain releases a surge of dopamine and oxytocin, the same chemicals present during drug use. You're not weak for falling for this pattern. You're human. The Zeigarnik Effect makes your mind loop endlessly on the unfinished emotional narrative they're creating. Studies from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology show that incomplete interactions occupy 7 times more cognitive space than completed ones. Their inconsistency isn't a personality quirk. It's a silent scream that they were never taught secure love. And now they're teaching you insecurity. Red flag number 2, the projection defense mechanism. Pay attention to what they accuse you of, because clinical data suggests that 73% of baseless accusations are psychological projections. If they constantly worry you're losing interest, they're probably the one emotionally checked out. If they question your loyalty without evidence, investigate theirs. Sigmund Freud identified projection as one of the primary defense mechanisms the ego uses to avoid confronting its own unacceptable impulses. When someone is deeply insecure about their commitment, their fidelity, or their emotional availability, they subconsciously project those fears onto you. This isn't conscious manipulation, it's unconscious psychological warfare. The Zeigarnik Effect amplifies this because their projections create unresolved tension in your mind. You start defending yourself against crimes you didn't commit. You begin monitoring your own behavior obsessively. Cognitive load theory explains that this constant self-surveillance exhausts your working memory, the mental bandwidth you need for healthy decision-making. Within months, you're no longer yourself. You're a reactive shell trying to prove your innocence. And here's the clinical truth. People with deep-seated insecurities need you to be the problem, because if you're not, they have to face their own psychological wounds. That's a reckoning most people will destroy a relationship to avoid. Red flag number 3, the vulnerability asymmetry. Notice how you've shared your traumas, your fears, your childhood wounds, and they've shared surface-level stories at best. This isn't shyness, it's strategic emotional withholding. Attachment researchers Mikulincer and Shaver found that individuals with fearful avoidant attachment create intimacy imbalances as a protection mechanism. By knowing everything about you while revealing nothing real about themselves, they maintain power and safety. You're emotionally naked while they're in full armor. The Zeigarnik Effect ensures you obsess over what you don't know about them. Who hurt them? What are they hiding? Your brain can't let it go. This asymmetry has measurable psychological consequences. A Stanford study on relationship equity showed that when one partner holds significantly more emotional information than the other, the uninformed partner experiences a 64% increase in relationship anxiety and a 58% decrease in self-esteem over 6 months. You start to feel like you're not worthy of their trust, when in reality, they're incapable of trust itself. Their childhood taught them that vulnerability equals danger, that exposure leads to abandonment. So they leave you perpetually outside, collecting breadcrumbs of intimacy, never realizing the door was welded shut long before you arrived. The incompleteness of emotional access keeps you hooked, hoping, hurting. Red flag number 4, the future faking phenomenon. They talk about elaborate future plans, moving in together, meeting families, traveling to specific destinations, but none of it ever materializes into concrete action. Clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula identifies this as a manipulation tactic common in individuals with narcissistic traits or severe commitment phobia. The fantasy future serves 2 purposes. It keeps you invested without them having to actually invest, and it keeps their own terror of real commitment at bay. The Zeigarnik Effect is weaponized here. You're living in perpetual anticipation of a future that exists only as conversational currency. Neuroscience research on temporal perception shows that when we anticipate positive future events, our brain's reward centers activate as if the event is actually happening. They're giving you a neurochemical high from imaginary experiences. Meanwhile, no deposits are being made in the actual relationship bank account. When you eventually confront the disconnect between words and actions, they'll likely make you feel like you're being unreasonable or rushing things. But timelines aren't the issue. Integrity is. Someone secure in themselves makes promises they intend to keep, or they don't make promises at all. The constant loop of hope and disappointment isn't love. It's a trauma bond forming in real time. Red flag number 5, the empathy deficit under stress. Here's the clinical test most people miss. Watch how they respond when you're genuinely struggling. When you share a bad day, do they ask questions or do they redirect to their own experiences? When you're anxious or sad, do they sit with your discomfort or do they minimize, fix, or dismiss it? Research from the Journal of Personality shows that individuals with deep insecurities often have what's called empathy erosion under threat. Your pain triggers their own unresolved wounds, so they psychologically retreat. They can't hold space for your emotions because they never learned to hold space for their own. The Zeigarnik Effect operates here because you keep waiting for the moment they'll finally show up emotionally. And that unfinished emotional support creates a psychological loop. You tell yourself, maybe next time they'll understand. But emotional attunement isn't a skill that appears randomly. It's built through secure attachment in childhood. If their parents didn't validate their emotions, they literally don't have the neural pathways for validating yours. This isn't about effort, it's about capacity. And recognizing that someone is emotionally underdeveloped isn't cruel, it's honest. The cruelest thing is staying with someone hoping they'll develop skills that require years of therapy to build. Red flag number 6, the accountability vacuum. When conflict arises, watch their response pattern. Do they take responsibility, or do they deflect, justify, and counter-accuse? The Darvo technique, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, is a documented psychological defense mechanism in individuals with fragile self-concepts. Every relationship mistake becomes your fault, your misunderstanding, your overreaction. Clinical research shows this pattern stems from shame-based identity formation, usually rooted in critical or neglectful parenting. To admit fault would shatter their already fragile sense of self, so they reconstruct reality where they're always the victim. The Zeigarnik Effect keeps you analyzing every argument, trying to figure out how you became the villain in a story where you were hurt. This is where the deepest psychological damage occurs. Repeated exposure to accountability-dodging behavior causes what researchers call perspective erosion. You slowly lose trust in your own perception of reality. Gaslighting isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's just the desperate flailing of someone who can't tolerate being wrong. But intentional or not, the impact on your psyche is the same. Cognitive dissonance, self-doubt, and eventually, learned helplessness. You stop bringing up problems because the energy cost of the deflection is too high. The relationship becomes a museum of unresolved conflicts, each one an incomplete narrative your brain can't release. And that's precisely how insecure people prefer it. Because resolved conflicts require growth, and growth requires confronting the wounded child they've been running from their entire life. Here's the clinical conclusion most people aren't ready to hear. You cannot love someone into security. Attachment wounds don't heal through relationship intensity. They heal through professional intervention and deliberate psychological work. The Zeigarnik Effect has kept you obsessing over these incomplete emotional patterns, trying to solve the puzzle of someone else's trauma. But you're not a therapist, and even if you were, you can't treat someone who doesn't believe they need treatment. The most powerful thing you can do is close the loop yourself, not by getting closure from them, but by deciding the story is complete as is. They showed you who they were. The incompleteness you feel isn't about them leaving things unfinished. It's about you not accepting that the answer was always no. Walk away from the Zeigarnik trap. If this clinical breakdown resonated with you, understand that recognizing these patterns is the first step toward breaking them. Subscribe to this channel for more evidence-based psychology that doesn't sugarcoat human behavior. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hand someone the psychological mirror they've been avoiding. And remember, the right person won't leave you guessing. Secure attachment feels calm, consistent, and complete. Anything else is just your nervous system mistaking anxiety for chemistry. Choose differently. Your future self is begging you to.